Live with CDP Sports Talk, a weekly sports and entertainment podcast sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet. Live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And on audio via Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Radio Public, and TuneIn. Now, here's your host, Chris Palme.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 14, overall 344 of Live with CDP Sports Talk, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210. Or you can email them at info@barrycullen.com as well. Live with CDP Sports Talk is on weeknights on radio station WQEE 99.1 FM in Metro Atlanta, the home of Southern Talk and Sports. I hope everyone's doing well on this. I can't believe it's already Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. As you can see, I have Little Caesars Arena in my background. I am not at the Pistons game tonight against the Sixers. They just started at 7 o'clock, and hopefully the Pistons can win. But I'm looking forward to my guest tonight. His name is Greg Eno. He's a writer, editor, sports historian, and he's the co-host of the Knee Jerk podcast with Al and Nick for the last 15 years in Detroit. And Greg has covered the Detroit Pistons, covered and followed them for 53 years. So I'm going to bring Greg on right now, and we're going to talk about the current state of the Detroit Pistons. Good evening, Greg. How you doing?
Chris, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure, and looking forward to talking about such a sad sack franchise.
Absolutely. I know I was born in 72. I don't remember the 70s a lot, but I know in the early 80s before they got Isaiah Thomas, it was in pretty bad shape. But it's just sad seeing this franchise the way they are right now. And what concerns me as a fan, not just a media member, Greg, is they're not even competitive. And that's what concerns me about this franchise.
Well, it's that they're not competitive. I mean, they've lost 20 games in a row, and it's not like a lot of those games have been nail biters. I mean, what's typically happened, and this happens a lot, Chris, with a lot of teams, bad teams in the NBA. They'll play well, they'll hang in there for 36 minutes. It's the fourth quarter that separates the really good teams from the really bad teams, and the really bad teams fall apart in the fourth quarter. Can't hit their shots, play matador defense. There are pylons out there on defensively, and it all just snowballs. And the other teams sends blood in the water, and they typically the Pistons. What has happened this year is they're within a few points after three quarters, but then in the early minutes of the fourth quarter, they get blown away, and relatively quickly. And that's where you see, Chris, the talent differential between they and the other teams in the NBA is because they just can't hang with those teams, and they're almost helpless to stop those runs.
Now, they've had a lot of high draft picks and Cade Cunningham and stuff like that. This roster, obviously, everybody didn't expect them to make the playoffs this year, but did you or anybody in the Detroit media or the fan base in Michigan thought this team was going to be as bad as they were at 2-21 right now?
No, I don't think anybody could ever really foresee historic futility. I mean, nobody goes into a season thinking, well, this team is going to be historically bad. They won 17 games last year, as you know. And but that was a disappointment. And I mean, obviously it was a disappointment when you lose 65 games, but it was a disappointment in the sense that in the 21-22 season, which was Cade's rookie season, of course, the Pistons were competitive. I mean, they didn't win a lot of games, but they played it well enough in the second half of the season. I would say like February on of 2022. To give folks reason to think that maybe with a couple of tweaks and another, some little bit of lottery luck and what have you, and maybe the right free agents, they could potentially, their ceiling might be competing for a play-in game in the 2022-23 season. Well, Cade got hurt, as you know, after about 12 games. And it just, that proved to be a bigger blow than anyone. We all thought it was going to be a big blow, of course, but it ended up being just a horrific blow to that team, and completely kneecapped their chances of anywhere near the play-in game. So there you have the 17-win season. But again, Monty Williams comes in. They have more, high draft choices again, like you said. But nobody thought. Everybody knew that the team needed shooting, and everybody knew that the team needed spacing. The roster was poorly constructed. But no, nobody saw 2-21. I don't think anybody could have seen that.
I've got a viewer on right now, Pam Austin. I missed the years with the Bad Boys, and I was going to say even the going to work Pistons I missed, and it seems like a lifetime ago with those teams as well.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about I'm going to get a little bit salty here about Monty Williams. He was the coach that was hired away from he actually didn't want to coach this year. He didn't want to coach, frankly. He wanted to take some time off. His wife wasn't well. And he initially told the Pistons that he didn't want to coach. And Tom Gores, the owner, did not take no for an answer and just threw a heap load of money at Monty, making him the highest paid coach in the NBA, really, I think in NBA history, quite frankly. And Monty right now, Chris, seems about as disinterested as the players are. And I think that the players are taking on that persona. Monty has horrible rotations. You mentioned the Bad Boys. This is no longer the era of the Bad Boys or the going to work business where you could hold teams to 80 points. That's not happening now. You can barely hold a team to 80 points at halftime, frankly. So the notion that Jaden Ivey, this is leading to what I'm speaking about, leads to the Jaden Ivey situation, where his minutes, last year, as you know, he was, a top 5 draft pick. His ceiling seemed really high, and he really seemed to flourish under Dwayne Casey. Monty Williams comes in, and Monty's got a reputation of having a doghouse and punishing players with lack of minutes and so forth. And that's what's happening. It seems to be happening with Jaden Ivey. And the knock on Jaden, according to Monty, is that he doesn't play defense well enough. Well, my goodness. This is the NBA of 2023. You're not going to win, Chris. You're not going to win titles with defense in this modern year of the NBA. You're going to win titles by outscoring your opponents and by shooting triples and by running the floor and so forth. Nobody's holding anybody to 90 points and winning that way. That's an old era style of basketball. So the viewer says that she's missing the Bad Boys, and you're saying you're missing the going to work days. But those eras of basketball are gone, and they're not gone back. I mean, that was a physical time. You could get away with winning a game 82-80. You can't do that nowadays, and no. So that's why the Pistons are. They don't have shooters. They can't shoot the ball. They have poor spacing. They have a bunch of bigs who do nothing but clog up the paint, and they have a roster that was constructed by Troy Weaver, who just is enamored with trying to getting reclamation projects from the 2020 draft, trying to gather as many 2020 lottery picks as he can, guys he wished he had 3 years ago that have been let go by other teams, and there's reasons why they've been let go by other teams.
Since Tom Gores owned this team since June 2011, 7 head coaches, a number of GMs. There's no stability with this organization. I know he's throwing some money around, but it just seems like when William Davidson passed away and this team was sold to Gores, and then I'm going to tell you this. I know everyone loves Little Caesars Arena, and I think it's a nice arena, but it's not really the Pistons' home, and it's like this team is kind of like rudderless right now, and Gores and Troy Weaver aren't saying much at all.
Well, I wrote a piece on my Substack, gregino.substack.com. Please go there and please subscribe. I come out with a new piece pretty much every week, usually on Mondays. And if you subscribe, it'll come right into your inbox. The piece that I wrote Monday was exactly that, about the lack of transparency via Gores and Weaver. Nobody's talking. The coach, Monty Williams, is a liar, frankly. He's lied about a lot of things. He's lied about the Jaden Ivey situation. He's lied about the different things he's going to do. He lied about, I think, wanting to be here. I wish he would just admit that he doesn't want to be here and quit. get bought out or whatever. But back to Weaver and Gores. The fact, Chris, that we're in a 20-game losing streak and probably going to be 21 by the time we're done tonight. And there's been not one word spoken by either of those guys. I call them Beavis and Butthead in my last piece. The fact that we haven't heard word one from them is unconscionable. Absolutely unconscionable. Now, you could get away with that maybe back in the day where social media wasn't as prevalent. And right now, fans feel like, whether it's true or not, they feel like they've got a direct pipeline to the teams that they follow by way of Reddit, by way of Twitter, by way of other social media platforms, because they feel like that's the way that they can talk directly to their teams. And you can't any longer run and hide and pretend like something like this isn't happening. And we haven't heard one word, not one word from Gores and Weaver about this. And that to me is criminal.
You said it well, Greg, and I did read your article. And the thing is, in terms of all-time worst seasons in Detroit sports, this might go down as obviously the 2008 Lions were 0-16, but I think this might even be worse because these guys aren't saying a word at all, and it's like it's just frustrating right now seeing this franchise hit rock bottom.
Well, this franchise has hit rock bottom on multiple occasions. The team moved to Detroit. Mm-hmm. Some of the viewers may not know this. Back in 1957, from Fort Wayne, Indiana. The first decade or so in the 60s, the NBA itself was kind of a second-class league. Wilt Chamberlain, no less, wrote an article for Sports Illustrated called "My Life in a Bush League," in which Wilt decried the NBA the way that it did things, and the second-class way that it treated its players and so forth, especially the black players. Well, the Pistons in that time were a second-class organization as well. They were a second-class organization, quite frankly, until the late 70s when Bill Davidson, the aforementioned Bill Davidson, who was the owner, hired Jack McCloskey to be the GM. And that's what turned everything around. Jack McCloskey was brought over to be the general manager, and he was he was steeped in basketball knowledge. He'd been a coach in the Ivy League. He was a coach for the Portland Trail Blazers and was an assistant with the Indiana Pacers at the time when the Pistons hired him. And Jack came in and completely took the decade of the 80s to do it, but built a championship organization from scratch. He told me, I interviewed him many years ago. He said, I looked at our team when I took over as an expansion team. One of the first things he did was he offered the Los Angeles Lakers his entire roster for Magic Johnson. His entire roster. Now, the Lakers didn't do it, of course, but they thought about it, Jack told me. Well, the thing is that that's what the Pistons need. They need somebody who knows what they're doing in the front office. That's where it all begins. And what's happened, though, is that you have now the disconnection between the coach and the players. And I think, frankly, Chris, a disconnection between the GM and the coach. I don't think that Troy Weaver wanted to hire Monty Williams. I think Tom Gores stepped in as he stepped in before. He stepped in when he hired Stan Van Gundy. He even stepped in when he hired Dwayne Casey. He's known to do that. He's known to meddle. And by the way, Chris, this organization also has is infested with nepotism. You've got Arn Tellum's son and Troy Weaver's son both having critical personnel roles with this team, and that's ridiculous. But there's a disconnect. I don't think Monty was wanted by Troy Weaver. Troy Weaver wanted Kevin Ollie, and he was about to hire Kevin Ollie when Gore stepped in and threw that Brinks truck at Monty Williams.
Overall, so Troy Weaver's record 62 and 197 with a 239 winning percentage. But from what you're saying, his hands are handcuffed as the general manager of the Pistons. Basically, Gores is calling the shots. And what's going to happen is Weaver's going to be the scapegoat at some point.
Well, I don't know. I would push back on that a little bit. I know it's tempting to say that based on what I just said, but I don't know that Gores I don't know where his meddling starts and stops. But I will say that if you're going to have a scapegoat in Troy Weaver, it's the right scapegoat, because Troy Weaver built this roster. Here's the thing I don't understand, Chris. It leaked out through the media a couple weeks ago that the Pistons management was not going to, quote unquote, push the panic button and do something crazy. Well, my goodness, not only are they 2-21 now, but they finished the season like 6 and something. Basically, I think they've lost 44 of the last 48 games. I think they're 4-44 in their past 48 games. Now, at what point do you consider making a move when you're 4-44 a panic move? What has to happen, Chris? Do they have to be 2-40 for the team to do something? What's considered a panic move? That's what I don't get. You're 2-21, 4-44, and they're not going to make a panic move. That is an attempt to buy themselves some time. Troy Weaver has to go. I mean, he just has to. You cannot let this man do any more damage to this roster and this franchise than he's already done. And if you want to call that a scapegoat, fine. But he's the guy that's got to go. Now, Monty's got to go too, frankly. They should fire him. The whole thing should be blown up. But you at least have to get rid of the guy who put this shambles of a roster together.
Is there any chance if this continues that the NBA can actually look at maybe possibly even say, hey, Tom, maybe you should sell the franchise? Because it's a bad look on the NBA too.
Well, there's 3 teams right now, Chris, the San Antonio Spurs, the Washington Wizards, and the Detroit Pistons, who I think combined have won like 5 or 6 games. Now, the Spurs are coached no less by Hall of Fame bound Greg Popovich. Pop's going to go to the Hall of Fame. There's no question about that. And he is lost. I think they've lost 15 or 16 games in a row. And they had the number 1 draft choice overall, supposedly a generational player, Wembanyama, and they are struggling. So yeah, the Pistons have been in trouble with the league before in the late 70s before they moved into the Silverdome. Actually, a little bit after they moved into the Silverdome, when they were playing to, tiny little crowds in that huge dome. The NBA, which I think Larry O'Brien was the commissioner at the time, did say that they were concerned about the situation in Detroit and that there was genuine concern that the franchise wasn't going to make it. This would be a situation, though. I don't think you could count on that to happen. I think that the league, that would be a difficult call, and that would be a bad precedent, frankly, if they did that. I know some fans would like to see that or something like that, but I don't. What I would like to see the league do, though, is change their format so that the worst team in the league unquestionably gets the number 1 overall draft pick. If you want a lottery, the 2 through 5, that's fine. But the Pistons won 17 games last year and got screwed in the lottery and fell all the way down to 5, which is ridiculous.
I'm not a big fan of it either, but it seems to be the new thing now. I'm surprised the National Football League hasn't gone to a draft lottery yet.
Well, that would be criminal because the NFL doesn't have to do that. The NFL teams bob up and down to the surface and down all the time in the NFL. It's a short schedule, relatively speaking, 17 games. Teams are good and bad almost year to year sometimes. There's only a handful of teams, as you know, who are good, really, really good every single year. And everybody else is kind of, up and down. And I don't think the NFL, because of that, needs to go to a draft lottery. I would hope that would never happen. The thing I don't like about the lottery is that it punishes. I know what people are saying about the whole tanking thing,
mm-hmm.
but I just don't think it. I just think it punishes the role. It overreaches. That's what it does. It's an overreach, and I think it needs, at the very least, needs to be tweaked so that the worst teams get slotted in, and then if you want to. Put lottery ping pong balls in for the other teams, that's fine. But the worst 2 or 3 teams should get the top 2 or 3 picks, because as we've seen in San Antonio, just because you draft a guy like Wemby doesn't mean you're going to be instantly good. Even the Cavaliers, when they drafted LeBron, weren't instantly good. It takes a little while. Steph Curry wasn't Steph Curry until about year 5 of his career.
What are your thoughts on Cade Cunningham? And do you think long term he can be the franchise player this team needs?
Here's the thing about that. That's a good question, because a lot of people are starting, a lot of the Pistons fan base right now are really becoming, when you're this bad, everybody's on the table for criticisms, of course. And Cade, we were all told, and I even wrote an article about this in August, we were all told that Cade looked great after the surgery. He was recovered. He had some great off-season accolades, some good reviews for some summer stuff he did. And we were all told that he was ready to put this team on his back and the team was going to take the next step. What's clear to me, though, is a couple of things. He's the kind of guy, Chris, I think that would look a lot better with a better team. And I know it sounds, like, well, duh, of course, Captain Obvious, but I don't know that he's the kind of guy, though, that can lift up a team that's this bad and put it on his shoulders. I think he's more of a guy who is, if he's surrounded with better players, will look better. Right now, what he's doing, Chris, is he's trying to take games over in the fourth quarter and failing miserably. He's a turnover machine, especially in the fourth quarter. He doesn't shoot very well. He's another guy who can't shoot real well. He makes poor decisions, and because there's such little talent on that club, he's being collapsed on. He's being double and triple teamed, and that's part of what's causing his turnover problem. But I don't know that he's as good as we thought he was going to be when he was drafted in 2021. And I'm not sure, Chris, that he's as healed from his shin injury as everybody says he is. I don't see the explosiveness from him that I thought I saw 2 years ago. I think it's still bothering him.
Wow. Hey, one thing I wanted to bring up with you too, Greg, is the Pistons attendance. The last game they had 14,988 against Indiana. Can you see the attendance going below 10,000 a game at some point?
That's right now there is a push on Pistons Twitter, Pistons Reddit, to boycott this team in all ways, shapes, and forms. Whether it's don't watch them on television, don't go to the games. If you notice the last game that they played, I think it was against Indiana on Monday night. The lower bowl was shockingly unfilled, and in the NBA, that's the one place you'd never see empty seats. Is usually the lower bowl. If you take a wider shot, camera shot, like what's behind you right now, that's where you start to see the empty seats. But when you get to the lower bowl and you get to the closer to the court, that's where people tend to get together because those are great seats. Those seats now are becoming sparsely filled. So yeah, it's possible. Sure. I remember the Lions when they were really bad in the late 80s, they were only drawing like 30 to 40,000 in the Silverdome, which of course held 80,000. So that really looked bad because the product was so bad. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there's still enough talent on other teams. That's the other thing too, Chris. A lot of going to an NBA game in Detroit anyway is about seeing the players on the other teams. The Sixers are in town, for example, tonight. Well, everybody wants to see Embiid. They want to see they want to see players from the other team. There's an allure. It's not about going down to the Little Caesars Arena and watching and see if the Pistons will win. And they're not going down there to see Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey necessarily. They're going down there to see who was on the other team. Because there are a lot of star players in this league that, you only get a couple of chances, maybe a year to see play in person. So there's that curiosity factor. So, but yeah, I mean, if this continues, I suspect that those attendance figures will dip.
Do you find right now the Detroit Lions being 9-4 are taking some heat off the Pistons right now? The Red Wings are improved. The Lions are a playoff team. And do you find that's taking a little bit of heat off of the Pistons right now?
Well, it could be because that story takes up a lot of oxygen, of course, because the Lions have been so bad for so long. But that's only going to last until January, of course, and then you're going to be stuck with the Pistons after that. Tigers spring training doesn't start till mid-February, so there's going to be a lot of time where you're going to have to pay attention to the Pistons. Should you choose to do that? But I don't know. I don't know if I would necessarily say it's taking any heat off because the fans right now are really, really angry. And they're really disheartened and they're sad. I mean, you mentioned some of the good old days of the going to work days and the bad boys and this franchise when Gores bought it in 2011 was, admittedly on the decline. There's no question about that.
Yes.
In terms of what was going on the court, but it's been so long now. It's been 15 years since the Pistons had a playoff victory. I'm not talking about a playoff series win. A playoff victory, a single playoff victory. It's been more than 15 years. Yes.
Yeah. 08.
That wears you down. That wears the fan base down. And I don't know that having a good football team for 4 months necessarily takes all that sting away.
And the Pistons have only made the playoffs twice under Gores. When you take over a franchise, obviously, Greg, it takes a couple years to rebuild it. But this is going on 13 years. What's Tom's excuse?
You know, I, I, I think he's made, I don't know him. I've never met him. I've never talked to him in my life, but I suspect if you were to sit him down, which is hard to do, of course, sit him down and ask him those questions. I think he would say that he has made mistakes in who he's entrusted, who he's made the steward of the franchise. And the other thing I would hope he would say is that he's made mistakes in staying out of the way. I think the Monty Williams situation is probably the most egregious of his examples of meddling. Dwayne Casey, I liked the Dwayne Casey hire. I thought that was a good hire. Tom seems to be kind of enamored with big name coaches. He brought in Stan Van Gundy. That mistake was to give Stan not only the coaching job, but the GM job as well, and make him a two-headed monster. That was not the right thing to do. I think that I think he would like the team to be successful. I just don't think he knows how to, and I think he just seems to react impulsively and gets starry-eyed.
Is there any chance that Troy Weaver and Monty Williams, like Monty's on the first year of a 6-year, $78 million deal, is there any chance that he could be gone before the end of this year along with Troy Weaver?
Like pull a Sheila Hamp with the Lions when she let go of Patricia and Bob Quinn a few years ago. The Monty thing that's the X factor here. I think Weaver has to go. Whether he will go or not, we don't know yet, of course. But I think Weaver for sure has got to be gone. The argument for Monty after about 10 or 11 games was, well, it's just 10 or 11 games. The argument now, though, Chris, after 23 games, after what we've done, that's like more than a quarter of a season. That's a pretty decent sample size. Is that, I touched on this in my piece on Monday. I don't think he knows what he's doing. I don't think he knows what he's doing in Detroit. I don't think he wants to be here. I think I underestimated the situation in terms of how bad the team was going to be. I think he's beaten down, frankly, by all the losing. I think that he probably, if he had to do it all over again, would have held steadfast, not taking the job. But that was a lot of money. I'm not blaming him in the least for taking that contract, because my goodness, 6 years, 78 million.
Yeah.
But the other argument that was made earlier, Chris, was that, well, if you let Monty go now, what's that going to say to the rest of the NBA, and what coach would ever want to come here? I don't think that applies anymore. I think when you're 2-21 and the rotation's a mess, and he's going 11 deep into his bench in the first half, I think you're in that land now, that area of it would be a mercy kill to get rid of this guy, and I don't think to get rid of him would cause any stress on the team's chances to get another coach to come in here, because I think that now they may not want to work for Tom Gores, but I don't think that getting rid of Monty Williams would cause coaches to rebel or revolt.
My concern as a fan is you have a lot of young talent on this team, and they're regressing, and how much damage can a season like this do to them long term? That's my biggest concern.
Well, I think the Ivy situation, Chris, has a domino effect right now. I think that there's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety that's born out of that, and I think that, and you're spot on, by the way, with your assessment about the young talent. They are getting worse. All-Star Thompson's getting worse. Ivy is if he's not getting worse, he's certainly not getting any better, because sometimes his minutes are in the teens. Imagine that. Imagine Jaden Ivey playing less than 20 minutes on some nights, which is what he does. Sometimes he doesn't start. Sometimes he does start. Cade, we already talked about Cade. Killian Hayes, oddly enough, this is kind of ironic. Killian Hayes is the one guy that might be the only one who's improving, which is kind of weird, because everybody wanted to run Killian out of time. He's still probably not, a starting guard in the NBA, but I think he's the one player, which is really weird, who's, I think, has improved, strangely enough. But everybody else, you're right. There's a lot of young guys, and now Jalen Duren, though he can't stay healthy. He's got ankles made out of glass. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, it's and there's no veteran presence, Chris. There's no, I don't want to hear about Bogey. Beyond Bogey, there's no veteran presence on this team that can help out in the fourth quarter. Alec Burks, I thought, was that guy. He's not. There's not enough guys, Chris, who are even like 25, 26, 27 years old. I'm not talking about guys that are in their 30s. I'm talking about, they don't even have guys in their mid to late 20s. Those are the kind of guys I'm talking about. This roster goes from 19 and 20-year-old guys to 35-year-old guys with almost no stop in between.
and that's not good either. What I was going to ask you, Greg, if you have a few more minutes, if you were running this team, I'm going to put you on the spot here. How do you go about fixing this roster and try to improve it to at least get the teams to be competitive the rest of the year?
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, everything's easier said than done. But what I would do is I would have a fire sale of essentially of I would shed all but 3 or 4 guys. I would try to shed everybody except Cade, Ivy, All-Star Thompson, and Duran. Other than that, everybody else, as far as I'm concerned, can hit the bricks. Well, I don't care what you get for them. I don't care if you get a second-round pick. I don't care if you cut them. I don't care if you buy them out. I don't care what you get for them, but they got to go. I would make a complete overhaul. I don't care. This obviously the season's shot. So I would get rid of as many players as you can, get as many picks as you can. And I don't care if you have to fill the roster with G League guys or whatever, or free agents that are sitting around right now on their sofas. But I would just keep 3 or 4 guys tops and call that your core. I would get rid of Monty Williams. I would get rid of Troy Weaver. And I would start completely from scratch, almost like Jack McCloskey did in 1979 when he had precious few NBA players and no draft picks and had to do nothing but trade guys just to get draft picks, for crying out loud. That's what I look at this team, Chris, frankly, as worse than an expansion team. I think an expansion team would be better.
Are there any Jack McCloskeys out there that could get this franchise back on the right path?
Well, that's a good question. There are a lot of executives. The NBA is funny. There's a lot of executives that kind of travel behind the scenes that kind of work. The NBA executives today, Chris, are not like the ones they were when Jack was hired. Those GMs and those executives were a lot more high profile. You had the Red Auerbachs of the world. You had Jack. You had, any number of other ones that, that back then you had also coaches and GMs who did do both jobs, but that was a different era. They could get away with it. You had the Lenny Wilkinses of the world. You had guys, Jerry Wests of the world. You had a lot of higher profile executive types who, if you were to ask that question, let's say 40 years ago, you would be able to rattle off half a dozen names right off the top of your head. Now the league is a little different, and the star power, and it's all about the players, and the coaches even aren't really that well known, frankly, let alone the front office types. So you'd have to do some digging and some vetting to find your Brad Holmes, for example, like the Lions did. I mean, a guy who's been kind of paying his dues, here's what I think about Troy Weaver. I think what he is good at is evaluating talent, college talent. What I don't think he's good at is building a team and building a roster. And I think that he lacks those administrative skills. I liken it to going to a grocery store, grabbing a bunch of items off the shelf that look really, really delicious, then getting them home and realizing, I can't make a meal out of this. None of this stuff goes together. But geez, it looked really good in the grocery store. That's how I compare Troy Weaver. I think he's made draft picks that he thinks have looked good individually, like in a silo. But when you put them in, when you construct a roster with these guys, all of a sudden you realize, and I called it constructing a roster in the dark. Then you realize, oh geez, I don't have shooters. I don't have guys that can spread the court. I don't have spacers. What am I doing here? That's what's happened.
I'm going to put you on the spot with this question. Detroit's had some bad GMs before, Al Avila, Matt Millen, but where, in terms of worst GMs in Detroit sports history, do you rank Troy Weaver?
Well, I go all the way back to Ned Harkness with the Red Wings, the darkness with Harkness days. You mentioned Millen. Russ Thomas wasn't very good with the Lions. Bob Quinn wasn't very good with the Lions. But hey, Chris, when you're talking about a team that could potentially set the franchise record for consecutive losses, which is 21, by the way. They did that spread over 2 seasons. They lost the last 14 games of one year and the first 7 of the next. When you're within striking range of the all-time NBA losing streak, of course, for one season, which I think is 28.
28 by the Sixers.
When you're that, after you've been at this for 4 years, here's the other thing. It's not like they hired Troy Weaver over the summer, and this is his first go around. When you're in year 4, Chris, and your team has won 2 games by Christmas time, and you're in year 4. That does put you historically bad. in a lot of different ways. So yeah, he's definitely up there. There's no question about it. Now, these other guys I mentioned were bad in other ways too. They were just bad. Russ Thomas was a miser. Ned Harkness was tried to be a college guy in the NHL. There were a lot of things that these guys were bad at. But as far as just pure what's the talent construction on the floor, Weaver probably does have them all beat.
Hey, Greg, does Tom Gores attend Piston games often, or does he kind of stay away from the Little Caesars Arena?
Well, that's the other thing. That's why I wrote that piece that I did on Monday. Tom Gores is an absentee owner. He lives in Los Angeles. He's lived in Los Angeles for a long, long time. That's where his business is. He sees the Pistons a lot when they're out there. He'll go watch them play the Lakers and watch them play the Clippers. But he doesn't really see them play that much in Detroit. And when he does see them in Detroit, that's why he always has these little press conferences, because they see him so infrequently. Absentee ownership is another thing that's not new to the Pistons. Fred Zollner was the absentee owner when he owned the Pistons out of Fort Wayne when he came to Detroit. He lived in Florida. He rarely attended games in Detroit. Bill Davidson was the last owner who was local. Bill was a local guy. He had a home in Florida as well, but he was always at Pistons games. He was always sitting in his seat underneath the basket next to the Pistons bench at the Silverdome and at the Palace. He was always there. And he was always at games dressed in his khakis and his loafers, and he was always there. And no, Tom Gores does not see the team play. I don't know if he watches them on television. I don't know. We don't know anything about what Gores does because he doesn't talk to anybody.
And that's what the scary part is. And to me, this is a franchise had a lot of success, a proud franchise at one point. And I in my opinion, I feel like he owes the fan base some answers here. Same with Troy Weaver. And it just and I was going to ask you too, Greg, before I wrap this up. They got Philly tonight, Philly again Friday, Milwaukee, Atlanta. They could very well set the NBA record for most consecutive losses.
Well, and I don't think there's any question that they're going to do that. That's the other thing. Sometimes you get on these long losing streaks and say, well, it's going to end. It's going to end.
Yeah.
Right now, and this has been going on for a couple of weeks now, where the fans are looking at the schedule and say, "Gee whiz, guys, I don't see another win here." And when you're this bad, where can there be another win? They had the Wizards a couple Mondays ago, and they said, "Well, this could be it," because the Wizards were, I think, both teams were 2-14 or something. Well, the Wizards came into Detroit. And in part of my language, bitch slapped the Pistons to the tune of 126-107. It was ridiculous. So there goes that chance for a win. I think it's Utah next week, or I think some team that's played one. They had Memphis last week, who's won like 5 games. And another thing too, Chris, is they play these teams when half the other team's roster is missing. Either they're injured or they're whatever. They're not playing, and half they let one guy beat them for Memphis, last week. One guy, essentially, Bane, beat them almost single-handedly, 49 points, Desmond Bane. It was Desmond Bane and one other guy, Jaren Jackson Jr., and a bunch of scrubs, beat the Pistons handily. Okay, handily. That's the scary thing. That's why I think that I don't see an end to this. That's the scary thing. I don't really see an end to this unless other team falls flat on their face one night and the Pistons just get hot and they might squeak one out. I don't see this ending anytime soon at all.
You know who I feel sorry for the most is Mark Champion and the voice of the Pistons in 76, George Palaha. Yeah, I really do. Yeah.
Right. No, you're right. You're right. They have to. You're right. They have to be courtside for every one of these things. Yeah, and that's another story. You and I could talk about the broadcast, but yeah, you're right. That's that. And the beat writers too. The guys and the gals who have to follow this team have to post on social media. You and I can ignore it, but they can't.
My cousins Mike and Terry from Taylor, Michigan, got me into the Pistons back in the early 80s when they had Isaiah Thomas. And when they had Isaiah Thomas and Jack McCloskey, you saw hope. Right now, from speaking as for myself, I don't see any hope for this franchise unless there's major changes coming in the next little while.
Right, and that's what's disheartening is the lack of hope. And I think that if one of those clowns, Gores or Weaver, would at least come out and say something, anything. Now they may not, they will be torn apart, of course, for what they do say. But if they just at least show their face and say something, and literally speak to the fans. I'm not talking about talking to the media in a little impromptu press conference at Little Caesars Arena. I'm talking about coming out and really talking to the fans. There should be an open letter. Frankly. I don't know what the open letter would say, but the fact that they're not saying anything and this lack of hope that you're talking about is incredibly disheartening. And it really speaks to their character, frankly.
In Weaver's 4 years in Detroit, this is his fourth year. Has he ever come out and talked a little bit at all, or has he been pretty well silent for the most part?
He's pretty much been silent. He'll come out and talk, near the draft as the team gets ready for the draft. He might talk a little bit during the summertime when the summer league happens. He may talk a little bit if they sign a player in free agency. During the season, he's really a low key guy. He doesn't talk a lot. And I'm not saying you have to go out there, Chris, and talk to the media every week. I'm not suggesting that. I mean, I'm not going crazy with it, but there should be some, the fact that this has gone on this long is, I don't know how you look at yourself and not talk to people.
I guess maybe the only way, I don't mean to be harsh about this, the only way maybe things will get fixed if people stay away from the arena and the arena is completely empty, and then maybe something will happen.
Well, here's the problem about that theory. And this is not just about what we're talking about right now. Sports ownership in general, that used to be something that might have worked. Oh, well, let's just not show up. Let's not buy the merchandise. Let's really send a message. Let's just send a message. We're not going to show up. Unfortunately, Chris, the way things are set up financially with these pro sports leagues is you can go, if you're in baseball, for example, you could go 0-162. And still come out okay financially, because the way that the things are set up,
TV contract.
Tom Gores has more money than God. Okay, so I don't know that he really cares about the fact that maybe the attendance is low. Now, it may not look good if he's egotistical and he looks at this franchise through an egotist lens, and if seeing empty seats, if he takes empty seats as a personal affront, then you might have a shot at something. But hey, that's why this whole Monty Williams thing, it's a lot of money, $78 million over 6 years, sure. But he can break off a check. Tom Gores could break off a check for that right now and barely feel it. So this whole thing about, well, let's protest, let's not go to the games. I understand where that's coming from. You want to believe that works, but these owners, Chris, and again, this is not just the Pistons, not just the NBA. These owners of teams, either you have the passion to win or you don't. And if you don't, then you're content to, there's not a lot of incentive, Chris, to make moves if the money keeps rolling in, unless you have a burning passion, like a guy like Mike Ilitch, who, grew up in the sandlots of Detroit and was made his self-made guy, opened up a pizza parlor in Garden City and grew his business and wanted to play for the Tigers and had dreams of being a baseball player and all that stuff, wanted to buy the Tigers before he bought the Red Wings, but couldn't. Yeah. I mean, a guy like that, sure. You can find guys like that, you can find owners like that who have nothing but the will to win, but those kind of owners are fewer and far between, sadly enough.
I totally agree with you, and I'm being a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I'm lucky because Jeffrey Lurie wants to win in Philly. They don't always win, but since he's taken over that franchise, they've been to 3 Super Bowls and won a Super Bowl a few years ago against New England.
Well, here's the thing too about that. When you build that kind of a thing like they're doing with the Eagles, and like what they've done in Houston with the Astros, when you build something like that, now you have an identity. Now you say, okay, this is Astros baseball, or this is Eagles football. There's an identity there. Okay, that's what Dan Campbell's trying to instill with the Lions.
Yeah,
you're trying to establish an identity where, Al Davis back in the day, just win, baby. It was always about winning, and there was a standard. There was a standard set. The Celtics were always good back in the day. Montreal Canadiens, all these dynasties that we all know in all these different sports. There was a certain, and in the Red Wings too, of course, in the 80s and 90s, there's a standard there. There's an identity. And when that's gone, when that doesn't exist, that's a hard thing to get yourself out of. When you're a guy like Lurie, like you just mentioned in Philadelphia, He's not going to stand for a 6-11 season. And the Eagles might be down one year. Sure, that happens.
Yeah,
but he's not gonna.
Yes,
that's not gonna last. That's not gonna go. You're gonna have a down year, yes, okay, but that's not gonna ferment and Eagles all of a sudden are gonna become a bad football team, unless of course things happen, like guys get old, they leave, and it's hard to replace them. I understand that, but for the most part, they have an identity. The Astros, as sick as we may be of the Astros, they have an identity. They're always good. They're always good, and the Spurs used to be that way. They used to always be good until recently. They've hit hard times, but they were always winning 60 games in San Antonio. They may not have always won the championship, but they were there enough to remind you that they had Spurs basketball. There was an identity there. They had a core. They had the guys that played together year after year after year, and of course, it's hard to do that nowadays.
Pistons, to me, haven't had an identity since William Davison passed away and the family sold the team to Tom Gores. I think it's been 13 years without an identity.
Yeah, and I know that's kind of a hard thing to define. What is the identity? And it's kind of a nebulous term. I understand that, but it's winning. Let's face it. It's winning. It's having a standard. It's not straying from that standard. It's not bringing in players that you don't think can uphold that standard. And you're right. But there's a lot of teams, though, Chris, to be fair. There's a lot of teams in the NBA who also don't have an identity. Let's face it. There's been a lot of teams.
That's true.
The Minnesota Timberwolves, who have been, I'm not talking about how good they are right now. I'm just talking about over the past 10, 15 years, have kind of wandered around in the NBA desert, losing 45, 50, 55 games a year that don't have an identity either. So it's not just Detroit, but I think we feel it more here because we have seen teams who have had identities.
Absolutely. Hey, Greg, I know I've kept you over 30 minutes, but do you have time for a couple more minutes? I just wanted to talk about your podcast show and just and on this day in Pistons history 40 years ago. Can you just quickly thoughts on that 186-184 Detroit win in 3 overtimes against Denver?
Well, of course, that was a different era in the NBA, as you know, and that was Isaiah Thomas's 3rd season. And I remember coming home from work. I was living in the Ypsilanti area at the time. I was going to Eastern Michigan University. I remember coming home from work that night, flipping the game on, and I couldn't believe what the score was on the screen. I was like, what? Now, granted, that was like 3 or 4 overtimes, but even after regulation, I think they were in the 130s, 140s. Yeah, that was a different time. You had a lot of scores in that. You had a lot of shooters in that on the floor that night. Kelly Tripucka, Isaiah, John Long, Kiki Vandeweghe, Alex English, Dan Issel. There were a lot of great offensive players on both of those clubs. And it was one of those nights. It's hard to believe it's been 40 years, but that was a whole different NBA animal back then. And but we're starting to see a little bit higher scoring basketball now. You're starting to see scores now consistently in the 110s, 120s, sometimes 130s. It's starting to get a little bit more because players are becoming more proficient at shooting the 3 ball now.
Favorite Piston moment in all the time you've been covering the team?
I was in the building, oddly enough, at Joe Louis Arena. It wasn't the Silverdome because the Silverdome was booked for another event, which is one of the reasons why Bill
85.
Well, this was 84. What I'm talking about. Bill Davidson wanted to, that was one of the reasons why he wanted to build his own basketball arenas, because he was tired of getting kicked out of the Silverdome. Pistons played a playoff series in 84 against the New York Knicks. Now, this is a first round series. This wasn't even a second round series, a first round series. This was game 5 of a best of 5. And the series was tied 2-2. The Pistons were forced to play the deciding game at Joe Louis Arena. And where they were unfamiliar with the lighting and with the court, the whole 9 yards, but that's what the way it had to be. So they play this game against the Knicks, and it's hot and it's humid inside that building. This is in April of 84. And Isaiah Thomas single-handedly, and I mean single-handedly, led the Pistons back from like a 12 or 14 point deficit in the last 2 minutes of the game. Isaiah scored 16 points in the final 90 seconds of that game. And I saw all 16 points of those 16 points from my seat in the end zone at Joe Louis Arena. He was unbelievable. He was hitting three point shots. He was sealing the ball, laying the ball up. He scored 16 points in 90 seconds, which brought that game to a tie into overtime, a series in which Bernard King, you remember him, scored averaged over 40 points a game in that 5-game series. To this day is still an NBA record for highest scoring average in an NBA series. Over 40 points a game, Bernard King. And sure enough, Bernard King killed the Pistons yet again in the fourth quarter. Isaiah fouled out, in overtime. Isaiah fouled out in overtime. Pistons lost by 3 or 4 points, lost the series. But even though they lost, that was without question the most memorable moment I ever had because of the individualistic nature of what Isaiah willed himself to do. 16 points in 90 seconds.
This team, to me, should have won 3 in a row before the Bulls. I still can't watch that 88 NBA Finals Game 7 against the Lakers. I would say my favorite Isaiah moment was Game 6 of the 88 Finals.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
That one in the, third or fourth quarter, he had, 25 points on a badly sprained ankle?
Yep, absolutely. And he was doubtful for Game 7, showed up at the press conference after Game 6 with crutches. And of course, nobody was going to keep Isaiah out of Game 7. That's for damn sure. But no, you're right. That was the 88. Don't forget to go 1 year sooner. Go 1987 when that Game 5 in Boston, the Eastern Conference Finals, where Larry Bird stole the ball and handed it to Dennis Johnson, and they stole that game in the series. If the Pistons win that game, they probably win that series and go to 4 straight finals.
Do you find this Bad Boys team doesn't get enough credit for what they did?
Well, I think do they not get enough credit for what they did? I think that they are given begrudging credit for what they did. I think there's a lot of old school basketball types who love that team. And I think there are just a handful of folks, and most of them probably live in Chicago, that absolutely hate that team and the way that they won. But it was they wore the black hats, and I think sometimes, Chris, you need a league needs a team to wear black hats and to be the villains. And the Pistons reveled in that. Guys like Bill Laimbeer, et al., even Isaiah, they loved being the villains. They loved going on the road. They loved being booed. Isaiah used to say, they don't boo nobodies, and it's true. And so, I think history, though, Chris, has become more kind to that team. As the further that team gets in the rearview mirror, I think the history is treating it a lot kinder.
Definitely. Hey, Greg, I know I've kept you longer. I'm just going to wrap this up. Can you just tell my audience here in the Toronto area about your podcast show called the Knee Jerk Podcast, 15 years with Al and Nick, and how often you do record an episode, and where is your show available for people to listen?
The mothership is called the kneejerks.net. If you go to the kneejerks.net, you'll be able to see all of the episodes archived. We've been doing the show, like you said, since 2009. We're in season 15 right now. We just added Nick as a third jerk this past year. The first 14 plus years were just Al and me. But we're having a lot of fun with Nick now as a triumvirate. We record every other Tuesday, and we upload to everywhere you can get a podcast. You can find it. But if you want to find it on the web, or on your mobile device, go to kneejerks.net, and you'll see the new episodes post. We just had a really, really good episode with Keith Gave, who used to cover the Red Wings back in the 90s and has written several books about hockey. We had a lot of fun talking to Keith. We've had a number of really great guests over the years. The aforementioned Jack McCloskey, God rest his soul, was one of our frequent guests. And so we've had a lot of fun with our guests, and there's always something to talk about. But here's the thing, Chris, we've done this show since 2009, and not once have we been able to talk about a Pistons victory. Not once. It's a playoff victory. Not once.
Yeah, in 2008, and it looks like it's going to be at least another year or two before that's over. So, yeah, definitely. Hey, I was going to say they might surpass the Lions for the longest playoff drought. I know the Lions' last win was, 1991?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think the Lions have a better chance to end that drought than the Pistons do for the next couple years.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And I want to say thank you to Pam Austin for watching our show as well. And Greg, finally, where can my audience follow you on social media and check out your latest digital stories? And I'm now subscribed to your podcast as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just go to I'm at Twitter. I'm at Greg Eno. Very simple. At Greg Eno, GREGENO. At Greg Eno at Twitter, and then my Substack is gregeno.substack.com. Subscribe, and I will come into your inbox every week. You don't even have to go to the site. My articles will come to you, and I would appreciate it if you would do that as well.
Hey, Greg, I want to say thank you so much. I apologize for keeping you over half an hour, but I could talk to you for 2-3 hours about the Pistons, and we didn't even get into the Red Wings and the Lions and Tigers. But hey, you have an open invite to come back on my show again in the future.
Chris, it was a pleasure. Thanks for asking me. It was a lot of fun. I'd like to do it again.
Definitely. Have a great night, Greg, and we'll definitely talk to you soon on social media. And hopefully the next time we talk to you, the Pistons have won a game. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
We'll see.
Fingers crossed.
See. Okay. Thanks, my friend.
Thanks, Greg. Good night.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed season 7, episode 14 tonight with my guest, Greg Eno. He is the co-host of the Knee Jerk podcast with Al and Nick for 15 years. Since 2009. So in terms of podcasting, I'm still a rookie, but hey, I want to say thank you to Greg for coming on here tonight. And you know what? I'm going to play a little video clip of one of my favorite Pistons games from 1983. And this was the game me and Greg were talking about, the Pistons and Nuggets from 1983. And I'm going to put this clip on right now.
Break. So get set for some fast-paced, high-scoring action tonight from McNichols Arena in Denver. It's the Pistons and Denver Nuggets.
I think whenever you come here and you know you've got to play against this team, especially with the formidable front line they have, if you're going to try and play offense better than them, you could be in for a long night.
Well, I can tell you we were on a long road trip.
I remember being amazed from start to finish. One thing you could say about the air was rare up there. We were in the Mile High City, and it didn't seem like anybody could be stopped.
Dunn matched up against Long, goes baseline with his pass to Issel, and he rips the net, and the Nuggets lead 2-0. Boy, they score fast.
It's the scoring that was going on. I mean, it was no missed shots that game. Both teams were on fire.
Vandeweghe's way out. He fires it anyway and fills it up anyway.
The first couple of minutes, everything was back and forth. Back and forth. There wasn't a whole lot of shots being missed.
John Long at the line, hit by Evans, hit by Dunn, but he scores it anyway.
And as the game went on, Chuck Daly said, hey, the way this game is going, we want to make sure we win this ball game.
The way we started out this first 5 minutes, I tell you, I thought it was going to be a 150-point game. Still might be.
Vandeweghe going baseline, finds Kelly, drives up. And Isaiah goes down to cure it, and then he dunks. Kelly sure was banged there. I don't think he was in any position to shoot it, but he did draw the contact. Inbound goes to Long, and John Long gets it just in time for the halftime in Denver. And we're all even at 74. The John Long screen by Lambier, left side, glass are good. John Long, folks, is now 10 for 10. Rebound by John, yes. 12 for 12 for John Long.
I think I hit my first 13 shots, and George Blaha and Dave Bean was doing the game at that time. And, every time you run by or during the timeout, they were saying, hey, keep it up, keep it up. And so you knew you were part of history, but the thing is, you just wanted to win the ball game.
Don goes alley-oop into Vandeweghe, can't get there. Lambier rebounds way ahead to John Long, lays it softly over the front rim, and it's 91-87, and John now is 13 for 13.
John Long had a huge night. Tepuka had a big other end, Kiki Vandeweghe and Alice English. Those guys put up big numbers that night. So, it got to the point where Chuck was like, just win the game. He ran out of things to say in the timeout. He said, whatever we do, let's get the win. Let's get the win.
Long goes to Isaiah, who is double teamed. He goes baseline anyway, flies up the jumper, fills it up. Isaiah. We have 6 seconds to play. It's still 145 to 143, and Lambier will go to the line. Boy, it is noisy in Colorado. He bangs it off the iron. Isaiah rebounds up and in with 4 seconds to play. Wow.
Man, you look at the score, in the first overtime, we knew something was crazy going on just by the score. In the regulation time, it was tied. We well over 100 points, going into the first overtime. We knew that it was going to be a special night by the number of points that was being put up.
when it went into the first overtime, we was like, okay, we can win this in 5-minute overtime.
Misses, and Curran rebound. Up to Isaiah behind the back. Now a drive by Hendrick and Evans to the hole it in. What a play by Isaiah. He9. It's 151. Kelly on a double team. Fires it up off the glass. Yes. We are tied at 159 with 31 seconds left.
Well, we had opportunities in all overtimes to win, but some kind of way that game, we kept tying it.
Wants to go to the hole, does, and scores. They run it off.
That's the right call. It is the right call. I heard the horn sound before it left his hand. I hate to say it, but it's the right call.
Then when it went in the second overtime, and we had scored so many points, Chuck said, hey, this game probably going to go down as probably one of the greatest games ever, so make sure we win the ball game.
And then when Chuck just looked at us when we came to the bench, and his words kept saying, just win the game. Just win the game. That's all he was saying, was just win.
Backing down on Colbert. Now he'll turn around, fade away, and pull it up. Keep it on 3 break. John down the lane. Yes. Right corner. Open is Trabuca.
Yes.
Fires. Fills it. Pistons 171 and Denver 169. Now 6, now 5, now 4, 3, 2 at the horn. He fires. No! Another overtime.
I think Lambier might have led us with 12 rebounds. You would think that maybe somebody have 20 rebounds in a game like that.
That third overtime is just like it just clicked. Isaiah went on the chair. Kelly scored. Everybody had their little spurts, and that's when we finally took over the game and got some control of it. But Alex English and Kiki Vanderway and all those guys were fantastic.
The big joke with the team that year was when we got back, the announcer kept saying, Kiki Vanderway, Kiki Vanderway. So every time we get in the gym and somebody hit a shot, we'd always yell that out all the time because he went for like 51 points that night. And all we could hear was Kiki Vanderway the whole night.
186, 184, a second to play, and now it's over.
Unreal.
The Pistons win this thing in Denver.
Unreal.
When it was all over, my broadcast partner at the time, the great Dave Biggs, said, unreal. And that's probably a great way to describe that game.
186, 184 is our final score. Thank you for helping us make history.
To see that now, when you look back on it, nobody's going to never score those many points. And it's great to be a part of that.
That clip was courtesy of Pistons.com and the NBA as well. And again, that was 40 years ago. And that's when I started growing up liking the Pistons with Isaiah Thomas, Bill Lambier, John Sally, Chuck Daly. And that was the days of Jack McCloskey and the Pistons dynasty back then. And it's just sad to see the Pistons 2-21 right now. The latest score right now between the Pistons and Sixers in the third quarter, Philadelphia 84, Detroit 62. With about 5:49 left in the third quarter as well. So it looks like the Pistons are on their way to a record, franchise tying record of 21 straight losses and their 12th straight loss at Little Caesars Arena. And then the Pistons this week, Friday, they're back against the Sixers again in Philadelphia, and then next week they're at Milwaukee and Atlanta, and they could very well break the franchise record, the NBA record of 28 straight losses by the Philadelphia 76ers, who ironically they're playing tonight and also on Friday as well. But I want to say thank you to Greg Eno for coming on again. He's a longtime editor, podcaster, and sports historian. And next time we get Greg on, we're going to maybe try to talk a little bit more about the Lions and the Tigers and the Red Wings. But the Pistons right now, to me, are in a lost franchise and have no identity. And I'm hoping some changes happen with this franchise coming soon. But I want to say thank you to Greg for coming on here as well. My next live with CDP Sports Talk to be announced this weekend. I am working on more guests and more shows for next week as well. And as always, Live with CDP Sports Talk is on weeknights from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern on radio station WQEE 99.1 FM. So when I'm done this live show for tonight, you can tune in to WQEE radio.12345.com as well. And my show with Jeffrey Brando will be airing tonight, and this episode with Greg Eno will air on Thursday night on WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia as well. Speaking of myself, I will be in Buffalo this Saturday for the Buffalo Bandits 23 championship banner game against the San Diego Seals. So I'll be covering the Bandits San Diego Seals this Saturday, December 16th at 7:30 p.m. And you can watch the game on CW23 or ESPN Plus or TSN Plus, or listen to it on 1520 The Score in Buffalo, New York, with John Gerkler as well. The Bandits are coming off a season opening loss 17-13 to Albany, the same team they lost last year at the KeyBank Center in their home opener. And the Bandits went on to win 14 out of 18 games, and of course their fifth NLL title. So I would tell Bandit fans, don't panic about that opening loss, but it's going to be important for the Bandits to get a win on Saturday. And they're playing a very good San Diego Seals team as well. And the National Lacrosse League, if you've never been to a game, check out a game at the Toronto Rock in Hamilton at the First Ontario Center, or just drive across the border to the KeyBank Center in Buffalo, New York. So I'm looking forward to the Bandits banner-raising home opener this Saturday, December 16th, 7:30 against San Diego as well. And as always, guys, I do this for all my shows. Live with CDP Sports Talk, again, is a weekly sports and entertainment talk show hosted by yours truly, Chris Pame, is on weeknights from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. on WQEE, the Key, the home of Southern sports and talk. Our radio station's website is wqeefm.radio12345.com as well. And when the show's over, please tune in into Live with CDP there as well. Live with CDP Sports Talk is also live streamed on these platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter /X, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And I want to thank everybody watching this live stream tonight on 6 platforms as well. You can also follow my digital media work on my website, beacons.ai/Chris D. Pame, and my previous radio shows and all my content is on that website on beacons.ai/Chris D. Pame. Live with CDP Sports Talk is again brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210 or email at info@barrycullen.com. Speaking of Barry Cullen Chevrolet, joy to the ride at Barry Cullen Chevrolet right now with the 2024 Equinox. You can lease for $219 bi-weekly. That's like $109 weekly at 8.9% financing for up to 60 months with $3,345 down payment on an ultra low kilometer lease. And you can also have a chance to win a 55-inch Samsung LSD TV with a test drive at Barry Cullen Chevrolet. If you book one on barrycullen.com, a test drive of any vehicle down there, you'll be entered for a draw to win a Samsung 55-inch LCD TV as well. Also, you can follow me on TikTok at Live with CDP. I do post a lot of content on TikTok for my radio podcast shows and all my media work there as well. So again, look for me on TikTok and hit the follow notification at Live with CDP. StreamYard is the official live stream provider of Live with CDP Sports Talk. If you're into webinars or podcasting such as yours truly, check out StreamYard.com. Live with CDP Sports Talk, the audio version is available on these platforms: iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify for podcasters, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Castbox, LinkedIn, Pandora, and tuned in. And again, on weeknights at 8 p.m. on WQEE 99.1 FM. You can also email or text Live with CDP Sports Talk at cpame19@gmail.com, or you can text the show at 519-820-7188. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions, any feedback for my show, please contact me there as well. Again, you can follow Greg Eno at Greg Eno on Twitter/X. And also his website is gregeno.substack.com. And his podcast website is thekneejerks.libsyn.com website as well. And finally, guys, Philadelphia Eagles came off a bad loss against the Cowboys, 33-13. The Eagles are now off until Monday night when they take on the Seattle Seahawks. Huge game for the Eagles. They're battling the Niners and Cowboys for the number 1 seed in the NFC, and also battling the Cowboys for the NFC East. So hopefully the Eagles can rebound against Seattle this Monday. The other big game this weekend is going to be the Buffalo Bills and Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are 10-3, coming off a big win over the Eagles. The Bills are 7-6, coming off a huge win against Kansas City. The Bills are going to be desperate. They're going to be at home, and I feel Josh Allen is going to have a big game against them as well. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And that's about it. Again, I want to say thank you so much to everybody for watching tonight's show live streamed and also on my audio platforms, and to those who listen on WQEE 99.1 FM. I want to say thank you to Greg Eno for coming on here. If you guys can give me about 15 minutes, I'll have tonight's audio and video version of our show downloaded and on my social media platforms as well. And I will make an announcement this weekend about my next show for next week. I'm working on at least 2 to 3 new shows for next week before Christmas time as well. And speaking of Christmas too, before we go, in case some people don't come on until the new year, I want to wish everyone watching and listening to live at CDP Sports Talk a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays if you don't celebrate Christmas, and a Happy New Year in 2024. And I just want to thank everybody for your support this past year. And I'm working harder on improving the show and getting more great guests coming into 2024 as well. But again, thanks to Greg Eno for coming on tonight and talking about the Detroit Pistons and a little bit about the past Pistons. And yeah, it's hard to believe that game I just showed here on my show tonight was from 1983, 40 years ago. And I'm hoping better days are ahead for this Detroit Pistons franchise that is a 3-time NBA championship team and has appeared in 5 NBA finals and 11 Eastern Conference championships in their past as well. I hope everybody has a great evening and a great weekend. And check me out on social media again on Saturday night, as I will be at the KeyBank Center for the Buffalo Bandits banner raising ceremony game against the San Diego Seals, 7:30 at the KeyBank Center. And I'm looking forward to the National Lacrosse League and a great game. All right, that's about it. Again, Live with CDP Sports Talk is brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet, and on weeknights at 8 on WQEE 99.1 FM. Have a great evening, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon on social media, and we'll be back next week for more Live with CDP Sports Talk. Good night, everybody.